welcome to you, Kai Sauer. We're really happy that you could join us today. And also welcome to our audience. So today we're going to speak about the United Nations and multilateralism and a lot of topics within this. And just before we start, I just have a few practicalities to start with. First of all, we're recording this event just so that people who are not able to join now can watch it later. And also, if you have any questions during the debate, please do write them in the chat and we'll read them. And then we can either ask them during the debate if it fits, or at the end where we'll have an open floor discussion. So this event today is organized by the European Debate Initiative, and we are an organization that organizes events with different experts. And today, a very knowledgeable expert within the UN and foreign politics. And previously, we've discussed with politicians and members of the European Parliament, journalists, experts from NGOs and different other places. But yes, so let's get started today. And I'll give the floor over to John, who will introduce our speaker quickly.
Yeah, I'm John. I'm a master's student of international relations at the UVA. We are all students at the UVA here, except Kai. Yeah, today we have the pleasure to talk to Mr. Kai Sauer about the UN and diplomacy, multilateralism, as well as conflict resolution and state building. Mr. Sauer has a very impressive CV, I would argue, that makes him an expert on these subjects. He is the current Undersecretary of State for Foreign and Security Policy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, and he has held that job since June 2019. Across his career in diplomacy, he has interacted with both national and multilateral entities of foreign policy making. Therefore, we're super excited to welcome you to today's discussion, Mr. Sauer. You were so kind to prepare a preparation, so without further ado, the floor is yours. Zoe, are you sharing? Yes, perfect.
Excellent. Thank you, Zoe, and thank you, John. Pleasure to be here with you. Yeah, I'm here actually thanks to John, who is a friend of my daughter, and I was told that I'm his first customer or client. So I hope John, you'll get the bonus for this end of the year bonus. And indeed, I'm planning to talk a little bit about my personal experience with the United Nations. It's an organization I've worked with for a long time and in different capacities. And the title of the presentation is The Role of the UN in Global Conflict Resolution. And I'm going to approach this topic mostly by trying to explain what the Security Council is doing, but also explaining a little bit about other instruments the UN has at its disposal in conflict resolution. And by this, I try to maybe argue the relevance of the organization, of the UN, in the broader framework of multilateralism, because it's really something which is keeping us professionals busy at these interesting times. But okay, maybe just to introduce myself a little bit, and the next slide, you'll see a few biographic details. I joined the Finnish MFA back in '95, but then started actually my second diplomatic posting in New York at the Finnish Permanent Mission as a junior officer. Very interesting period. I witnessed 9/11 from a very close distance. Actually, I was at the office of the Turkish, northern what is it? The northern Cypriotic Republic. I mean, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. That's the real abbreviation. Such a long time I forgot the abbreviation. But anyway, that's something you never forget. And really, at that time, there were some quite distinguished individuals representing their countries at the UN. The current Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, he was the Russian Permanent Representative. The legendary Richard Holbrooke was the US representative. So it was kind of a interesting period. And yes, also Kofi Annan, he was the Secretary General. And I mean, when you're at the UN, it's your memory is full of anecdotes. One is when Kofi Annan, he tried to ban smoking at the UN premises. And Sergei Lavrov, as you might know, he's a heavy smoker. He's a chain smoker. So it has actually never happened that the Russian diplomatic response has been so fast. Sergei Lavrov wrote a letter the following day saying that this is a member state sovereignty question. The Secretary General cannot ban smoking, so he could continue. Well, anyway, then I was following one of a Finnish politician who was appointed by Kofi Annan as a Secretary General's special representative in Kosovo in 2003. Stayed there for a couple of years, and actually that's where I met Francesca's father and aunt, who were also active in that region. And then I had another kind of UN mission. It was in Vienna, a very nice city for a UN peacekeeping mission. We tried to solve the Kosovo status dilemma. We didn't succeed because of the Russian resistance. And after that, I was the UN director at the MFA, Finland, and then finally ambassador in New York for 5 years, from 14 to 19, which was also an interesting period because you could first work together with the Obama administration. Samantha Power, she was my colleague. She's now being confirmed as the head of USAID. Well, then Obama left, Trump came in, and Nikki Haley was the UN ambassador of the US or Trump, and that was a completely different ball game. So quite a broad experience from the UN. If we go to the next slide, you will see the contents, like three parts of my presentation, and you will also, or you are seeing the famous Delegates Lounge. That is a new Delegates Lounge where smoking is finally banned. And I thought I present you with the picture of that because the furniture is a donation of the Dutch government. My interpretation is that the furniture was donated as part of the Dutch campaign to run for the UN Security Council. But yes, it's an interesting design, not maybe the 50s or 60s era, which is kind of the hallmark of the UN building. But if you've been to the UN building, you'll be surprised what kind of things you find there, because every government gives the UN a gift, some sort of a gift, and you find the gifts in the building and outside the building. So it's a bit of like an what's the word, Trödelmarkt in German.
It's a flea market.
Flea market, exactly. Yes. Yes, so we'll start with the look in the Turtle Bay engine room. Turtle Bay is the area where the UN is located. It's actually an old meat market or butcher market, plot of land which was donated by the Rockefeller family at the time, and then the building quite impressive architectonically, designed by famous architect Corbusier and his team. Yes, we can go to the next slide. And why I'm highlighting or emphasizing this fact that the UN is the sum of its parts. It is my standard line to those who are criticizing the UN for being ineffective, not producing results, especially in the crisis management field. It is really a sum of its part. There are 193 members in the UN representing different cultures, different political cultures, different financial cultures, and different administrative cultures. It is, you could compare it to a company board with 193 members who are most of them pulling into different directions. So you can imagine how running such a company would be. I don't think it would survive in the private sector for a long time. But the UN has to survive. So it's basically designed by committee, and this is also reflected in the outcome of the organization or the products of the organization. So this diversity is actually compounded by the fact that you have a small group of member states who are more equal than the others, and you guess who I am talking about. These are the 5 permanent members of the Security Council: China, France, Russia, United Kingdom, and US. Originally, when the UN was founded in 1945, there were 9 members of the Security Council. But in 1971, the number was increased. It was the result of the decolonization process. And also the number of non-permanent members was increased to 10. So that is the current situation. The 10 non-permanent members are elected by the General Assembly. Each and every year there are elections because they are rotating different cycles, and most of the elections are so-called clean slates, where the regional group, there are 5 regional groups, they are listed on the slide. There's an agreement, if there's an agreement in the regional group which candidate is going to be elected, then it's called the clean slate. And most of the groups, they are managing this agreement, coming to an agreement, but our group, the Western European and other group, is notorious for the fact that it hardly ever can agree on the clean slate. So you almost every year you see a competition between WEOG members for the Security Council seat, and especially for smaller countries, this is a very resource demanding exercise, and sometimes with a creative outcome, as we had when the Netherlands, Italy, and Sweden were running for 2 seats, and after several rounds of voting, there was no outcome between Italy and the Netherlands. So I was there. I was there in the General Assembly Hall. So I witnessed when the delegations they took a call from New York to Brussels, where the European Council was meeting. The prime ministers were meeting. So the foreign ministers, they called the prime ministers and asked them whether we could share the term. So the Netherlands got 1 year and Italy got 1 year. They pretended to be happy with that, but of course they weren't. It was like a lukewarm compromise. And Sweden was like leaning back, and they were happy to have their two-year term, which was a good outcome for them. It was quite exciting, but also illustrative of the fact that we are wasting a lot of political.
I think the internet connection just broke down real quick. I hope that he'll be back in a second. We'll just have to kind of steer back in a second. Sorry for the interruption, guys.
Let's hope he returns in a bit.
Yeah, back.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes, you were gone.
It was a sign I shouldn't talk about the OECD, so let's not talk about it. Yeah. So anyway, the Security Council is of course the body of the UN, which is the most important one because the products of the Security Council, which are called resolutions, they are binding international law. The General Assembly, the body of the 193, they are also adopting resolutions, but they are not international law. They are basically recommendations. And so there's a big difference. Next slide, please. Yes, so if we go to these privileged 5 permanent members of the Security Council, why are they privileged? Well, number one reason is that they are permanent members. They cannot be outvoted. And number 2, they have a veto power on the Security Council. And why they have a veto power? It's quite simple. It's a lesson learned from the League of Nations, the predecessor of the United Nations, where actually the US never became a member of. And why did the US not become a member of the League of Nations? It is because of the resistance from the Congress. And why did the Congress resist? It was because they thought the US shouldn't become subject of outvoting. So that is why they decided not to join the League of Nations. And the League of Nations, we know what happened. It couldn't prevent the Second World War, and it basically collapsed. Many of its rules and regulations and structures were adopted then when the UN was created. But there were also differences, and one of the most important differences is the fact that the Security Council has these permanent members with the veto power. So this was a concession made to the US, of course, also to the other 5 or 4 permanent members, so that they could join this body without the fear of becoming outvoted by the numbers and the non-permanent members of the Security Council. Actually, there are many interesting stories from the San Francisco conference, which led to the UN Charter. One was actually that France was. It was not self-evident from the beginning that France would become a permanent member of the Council. It was kind of a late compromise which was made, and yeah, it was an interesting event. You can look it up there. There are interesting books. I have a slide in the end where I have some references with literature, but let's come back to that later. So next slide, please. Here we have indeed again the products of the Security Council. Resolution, which is legally binding, and the resolution is in the most of the cases it's giving a mandate for military action, mandate for peacekeeping, and mandates for sanctions. And there are more than 2,500 resolutions so far, which have been adopted by the Security Council. And you might wonder how come there are so many? You haven't heard of most of them. And that is true because the mandates are usually time limited. So if you want to keep a mandate alive, which is very often the case, so you have to issue another resolution. So if you have a conflict which has been running for decades, like let's say Cyprus or the Middle East, you have quite a pile of resolutions referring to that case. I have also noted a couple of like so-called landmark resolutions. There are others, of course, but these are a couple of prominent ones, 6, 7, 8, which gave like the authority for military action in the case of Kuwait, when Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait. There was a rare agreement by the big powers to resort to military means to liberate Kuwait. And then there's the Middle East or the Palestinian-Israel Resolution 242, which is still quoted very frequently because it is stipulating the two-state solution. And why the UN is perceived to be so ineffective, in my view, is that very often, in most of the cases, actually, the Security Council is not able to agree on the mandate. So we have some current crisis like Tigray in Ethiopia, Myanmar, where the junta assumed power illegally and it's killing civilians, or Ukraine, a blatant violation of international law, where actually a Security Council member invaded territory, sovereign territory of another UN member state, and there's no Security Council resolution sanctioning it. So why is it? Why is this the case? It's also very simple. In all these cases, you have a permanent member of the Security Council or an influential member of the international community of the UN, or a group of countries which have their national interest or their national interests at stake. So of course, in Ukraine, it is Russia. They don't want to be become a subject of the discussion at the Security Council, and they try to block the discussions. And of course, there's no chance for a resolution because they have the veto power. Another argument which is frequently used is that these violations are not threatening, posing a threat to international security, which is a stipulation in the Charter, but they are internal kind of conflicts. And because some or quite a few members of the UN actually see that territorial integrity and sovereignty are stronger than the Security Council mandate or the responsibility to protect principle. So this is basically why the Security Council is paralyzed or passive on most of these conflicts. If we go to the next slide, you will see some statistics, how the veto has been used. So the most active country in issuing vetoes is Soviet Union / Russia, and it has been quite active over the past years on Syria. US is number 2. And the US has actually been more active than Russia in the past decades, mostly because of the Middle East, Palestinian-Israel dispute. UK and France, they haven't really used the veto right much. And the last time they did it was in 1989. It was a triple veto, actually, US, UK, France, on the question of Panama. And China has also been quite passive. As Republic of China, it vetoed only once. It was on Mongolia. It vetoed the membership of Mongolia at the time. But then the People's Republic of China has used the veto 15 times, and quite frequently in tandem with Russia. So they are supporting often each other. Of course, this threat of a veto, it influences the work of the Security Council in many ways. It prevents many draft resolutions even to be discussed in the Council, so they are not making the statistics. But sometimes it's also the other way around. Sometimes draft resolutions are presented in order to trigger veto. It is quite rare, but it sometimes happens because you want to demonstrate that your opponent is misusing or abusing its veto power. So next slide, please. There have been quite a few initiatives or attempts to curtail the usage of the veto power. The first one goes back to 2005. It was in connection of the UN World Summit, where the group of small 5, the S5 group, with those countries, Costa Rica, Jordan, Liechtenstein, Singapore, and Switzerland, initiated or advocated for the permanent members to refrain from using the veto in these serious crimes, international crimes situations. Then there's the ACT group. The S5 group, by the way, is not functioning anymore, but the ACT group is quite active. It has large membership, mostly small countries, and they are pushing the Security Council to be more accountable, more coherent, and more transparent. And they are also advocating for responsible usage of veto power. Of course, some of the permanent members of the so-called P5, and I'm talking about France and the UK, they are trying to present a constructive profile. They are constructive in many ways, and they have been quite good listeners to these groups who are advocating for responsible usage of veto. And France, actually, together with Mexico, they launched this high-profile initiative about or for refraining from this veto usage in certain situations. But I have to say that I would be surprised if any of these P5 members would really compromise or give up or be even partly sharing their privileges as the P5 members. You might be aware of the ongoing discussion to expand the Security Council. It has led nowhere. From time to time, there's discussion in the EU whether the EU should have a seat as a permanent member, or France should give up its seat as a permanent member in exchange for an EU seat, but I don't think this is realistic. So what is perhaps important to note, and what is relevant with regard to the title of this presentation, is that when there's a P5 interest at stake, a national interest at stake, don't expect the Security Council to come up with the resolution. This we have seen time and again. So next slide. There are other, or maybe the question should be, are there any successes the Security Council can present under these circumstances? Aren't there always interest of the P5 at stake in conflicts? Well, yes and no. We have, as I said, we have a long list of resolutions, and there you have it, the last bullet on this slide. I looked it up. Resolution 2569 was adopted quite recently. So there have been successes, and if you look at the map where we have most of the UN peacekeepers, they are in Africa. There are several UN peacekeeping missions in Africa. Each mission is based on the Security Council mandate, so we can see that the Security Council can actually agree on certain issues. It's not easy, even if it would be the remotest corner of the world. It is kind of a built-in dynamic in the Security Council resolution negotiations that they are not a walk in the park. There's always an angle and they are quite long processes. But there are outcomes in certain conflicts, and you have also sanctions resolutions. I would actually not be surprised. Oh, well, let's put it differently. There is a slight chance that the Security Council could agree on some sort of an outcome with regard to Myanmar. China seems to realize that they have it is to their own interest that the situation would be stabilized there. Russia is a bit of a question mark. They like to be a spoiler on these things, and it's also interconnected to how parallel tracks are running. If you look at the menu at the moment, there's so many tracks. You have the JCPOA talks in Vienna, where you have the P5 active. You have the Myanmar question, and Ukraine, and many others. And it is kind of very often it's an equilibrium between these different tracks, which then result in some sort of an outcome. But anyway, one category which is falling outside the so-called conflict resolutions are thematic resolutions. And there's a growing number of thematic resolutions. They are also tough to negotiate, but they are maybe slightly easier than the resolutions related to geographical conflicts. So I picked again a couple of prominent ones, especially the 1325. It's really a landmark resolution on women, peace, and security. There are actually 4 follow-up resolutions building on 1325, which basically are in different forms and from different angles communicating how the gender aspect should be taken into account in conflicts and conflict resolution, and they've had an effect. I've really testified to that. In Syria, for instance, before the awareness of the gender aspect, I don't think women would have had a seat around the negotiation table, but now they have, and it is largely thanks to this resolution and implementation by the UN of the resolution. Yeah, then in addition to the resolutions, the Security Council can also issue a presidential statement, so-called PRST, or a statement to the press. And don't be fooled. These are not innocent documents. These are also results of tough negotiations. And in many cases, you cannot even agree on these. But they are more political expressions of will, but they are highly relevant to the respective case. And again, if we take an example, Cyprus, the conflict of Cyprus, which has troubled us for decades, the parties they know exactly what is said in which presidential statement or statement to the press, and they are quoting them and using them in this kind of diplomatic process, which hopefully will continue. So good. So this was maybe all what I wanted to say about the Security Council. Then if we go to the next slide, if we go outside the Security Council and to the tools which the UN has to exercise conflict resolution, I think peace mediation and conflict prevention. Actually, conflict prevention, we should start with that. Conflict prevention is a relatively new term, which was coined in the early 2000s, and it kind of created a whole new branch of the United Nations. It was based on the philosophy that if you prevent a conflict, you save lives and money. So you have to invest a little bit into conflict prevention in order to prevent investing more or spending more in conflict resolution. So basically, peace is cheaper than war, and this is, of course, a logic which is hard to counter argue, and it started growing, and it also manifested itself into the UN structures and within the Department of Political Affairs, which is I would say the most influential, most important department of the UN Secretariat. They created a cell, a little unit, which then grew into a larger entity around this conflict prevention and peace mediation kind of philosophy. And here you have on the slide, you will have at least part of the terms of references of this department. And of course, the most visible representatives of this department are the special representative of the Secretary General. If you go to the next slide, you might see some familiar faces. These are from my home archive. Former Finnish President Martti Ahtisaari on the left, and then you have the next generation, Slovak former Foreign Minister Miroslav Lajčák, who is currently negotiating, or the EU Special Representative for the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue, and he has had several other interesting positions with the UN and the EU. And then on the right, at least the Germans should recognize the person who's standing next to me. He's a former German president, Horst Köhler, who was the UN Secretary General's personal envoy for Western Sahara, and he actually was quite successful in that capacity. But he then resigned for health reasons. So these prominent figures, former presidents, prime ministers, foreign ministers, they are frequently used by the UN Secretary General to represent him and try to resolve those impossible situations. And well, sometimes there are successes, but most of the time there are disappointments. It is in the nature of the work. But peace mediation is definitely something which is on the raise, not only in the UN, but also in the European Union and in the regional organizations, OSCE, and the African Union. Governments are realizing that it is important to try to prevent the conflict, and you can do it in many ways. Of course, as peace mediation, it can be preventive, but it can be also a post-conflict activity. And when we are talking kind of a long-term conflict prevention, we can also discuss development, how important that is, humanitarian work. It's a quite complex subject. But this was maybe just a kind of a taster or teaser for you about one dimension of the UN, which is quite important. Then if we go to the next slide, and this is approaching the end. Why is the UN relevant if it is ineffective? I would say that even a little bit following the Winston Churchill's statement about democracy, it is still the best. The UN is still the best system we have. It is better than nothing. Without the UN, we would not have a global platform where we can meet, at least in principle, as equals. And as I explained before, the Security Council, they sometimes can produce results. It is better than nothing. And this is something we haven't really discussed yet, but there's also the General Assembly, the big hall with 193 members, which has also power if there's enough consensus, if there's enough agreement. And this power can be manifested in many ways. A recent example is, you might have seen it on the news, after this coup d'etat in Myanmar, the ambassador of Myanmar in the General Assembly made a plea to his colleagues, a plea to the world. It was a public a plea not to recognize the illegal power in Myanmar, and it had an effect. So it is a platform. It's like a multiplied Hyde Park soap box, which can really produce results. But it can also produce resolutions which are positive, and I would again quote a structure. I somehow I forgot to write it on the slide, but it's a abbreviation again. It's a triple IM. We call it the mechanism, but it's accountability mechanism to, for Syria. The full name is the International, Impartial and Independent Mechanism to Assist in the Investigation and Prosecution of Persons Responsible for the Most Serious Crimes under international law committed in the Syrian Arab Republic. So it's quite a name for an organization or institution, but I think it is a valuable contribution by the General Assembly, and it is also an example of a work or a product which can be created by the General Assembly if there's enough unanimity behind it. I was there when it was created, and it was largely thanks to the good work of Liechtenstein and Qatar. But I remember also lobbying strongly in favor of this, and yeah, it was quite successful. If you are interested, you can look it up. And then the 3 bullet points on the bottom, I have picked some examples of the recent achievements of the UN. Those are not resolutions. They are not even binding agreements, but they are nevertheless commitments of the international community. I would say quite universal commitments, which are hugely important. You have the Paris Agreement, you have the Agenda 2030, and you have the Migration Compact. They are good examples in the way that they represent agreement, a broad consensus among the international community. And they are negative examples in the way that they are not internationally binding agreements. And this is, I think, kind of the sad note we are arriving at, that we are probably incapable of creating strong and meaningful international law under the current circumstances. So even these type of non-binding compacts and agreements, they are quite difficult to achieve. Many people say that if we had to negotiate the Universal Declaration on Human Rights today, we would never arrive at the similar strong and principled outcome as we did in 1948. Well, they did. We were not part of that, but it was a good outcome. Okay, then next slide. This is the reference slide I promised. A couple of books. Stephen Schlesinger, Act of Creation. It's really it reads like a crime novel about the creation of the UN. It's quite exciting. Paul Kennedy, he's a famous historian, Parliament of Man. Also a very good description of the UN. And then if you are really into it, and also if you need a reference to resolutions, etc., all the kind of nuts and bolts you can find through the Security Council report. It's a think tank in New York, which main task is to follow the Security Council and record the Security Council. Then on Twitter, Richard Gowan, he's a friend, and he's probably the most knowledgeable person on the Security Council, and especially on conflict management in the UN. The International Peace Institute is also relevant in that realm. Good. So last slide, I guess, if you. Yeah, that's classic. You might have seen it before. It's not as bad as in the comic, but sometimes it makes the reality. Yeah,
it makes it out to be a very, very painful piece of work. Thank you so much for your presentation. I think you touched on a lot of like very, very interesting topics, which we would like to, maybe get back to in the next half hour. Thank you so much for preparing this presentation for us and walking us through the inner workings of the UN and why you think certain things work and certain things don't work. That also kind of leads me to my question. I find it very interesting that you highlighted the vetoes that have been issued on the Security Council. I think after the end of the Cold War, there was a widespread hope that a certain paralysis that was keeping the Security Council in check would kind of be lifted, and there were high hopes for peacekeeping and conflict resolution, as well as the responsibility to protect. And I found it very interesting that you mentioned that as long as these issues do not really concern one of the 5 veto powers, some things can be done. I think Fanny will touch on peacekeeping and conflict resolution a bit later on as well. But I think this is like kind of how do you say it? Maybe this is what motivated Ban Ki-moon in the talk with you last month. For everybody who's listening, last month there was a talk between Mr. Sauer and Ban Ki-moon, and there he mentioned that the Paris Climate Agreement and the sustainability goals were the two big achievements of multilateralism in the recent years. And what I found very interesting was that conflict resolution or conflict intervention was absent in this mentioning. Basically what I was wondering based on that was, do we see a shift from the UN being more of a entity that does like more thematic resolutions and these non-binding kind of how do you say it? Yeah, this non-binding agreements with each other, or do you still see like a lot of space for conflict resolutions, maybe in countries that the big five in that sense don't really care about that much? Or where do you kind of see this trend happening too?
Yeah, I think that is the question which will keep us busy for the next couple of years at least, and it is not limited to the UN. It is related to multilateralism more broadly. But if we talk about the UN, it really depends on the big power climate. I mean, we had the niche in the late 80s, in the early 90s, and the Kuwait resolution actually falls into that niche, where the Security Council could agree on certain issues. And after that, it became harder. And I think currently the climate is very low. It's below zero, most probably. And there's one or two big factors which are contributing to it. One is the US-Russia relationship, which has always been there, and you can measure the council's temperature by the temperature of that relationship. But now we have China there as well. And China, if you look at their investment into the UN, it has been increasing. It has been increasing in the development field, although China looks at it or tries to project an image of a third world country, like Singapore, by the way. They've also tried to do that, which is quite funny. But China, they have become not only they are a development aid recipient, but they are also providing aid, and increasingly so. And they are channeling it. We all know about the investment schemes, the Belt and Road initiatives, which is like the main channel for their investment and support. But the UN is another one. You might know that the P5, the privileges, I should have mentioned this in the presentation, but the P5, they are not only dominating the playing field or the rule book of the UN. They are also dominating the departments, and so you have mandates or territories which are not official, but they are custom. So the French, they always have the Department for Peacekeeping. There's a Undersecretary General, a Frenchman. I think it's the fourth or fifth currently in the row. The Brits, they have the humanitarian aid department, the OCHA. The Russians, they are heading the Geneva UN family. And the Americans, they have the political department. Japanese, they have the Undersecretary General for Administration, who's controlling the expenses, and so on and so on. Germany actually has considered herself to be underrepresented in this game. Germany is one of the largest financial contributors to the UN, and they feel they are not represented sufficiently in the hierarchy of the UN. So this is one way to exert influence, and China, they are in control of the DESA, which is one of the big departments, and it is the department for development, economic and social affairs, which has the most exposure to the third world countries, to the non-aligned movement. So it's a very strategic approach for China. China has also increased its contribution into peacekeeping. They have peacekeepers in Africa, large contingents. Since a couple of years, there's the first Chinese special representative of the Secretary General. He's covering the Great Lakes in Africa. I don't believe in coincidences in this big game. So yes, this is kind of a reflection of the Chinese strategig investment in the UN. But you also asked whether the UN whether it is moving into the direction of non-binding law or agreements, or kind of soft law. I think yes, and that's what I tried to say in the end. And I mean, it's for the Secretary General, it's tough. You know, they say it's the most difficult job in the world, and it probably is in many ways. You have to maneuver in such a cross expectations situation. It's virtually impossible. Guterres is he's a seasoned politician who is now standing for re-election. So don't expect too controversial kind of statements from him. But he has, I think, very well realized the importance of pandemic, COVID, and he's using now the pandemic and the UN. I mean, the UN to have a larger role in the global response in fighting the pandemic, and that's the right thing to do. So this will kind of legitimize the UN, I think, in this situation. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting question, also regarding especially not just how the UN's role is gonna develop in terms of climate, as we've seen with Paris, but also maybe increasingly regarding public health. Yeah, I think then I'll basically give over the floor to Fanny. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to talk about quickly the theme of peace building and maybe conflict resolution as well. And here I find the example of Kosovo quite interesting, because in 1998, when the conflict started between the Yugoslav army, Serbian army, and Kosovo, which back then had 90% of its population Kosovo Albanians and 10% Kosovo Serbs. The UN did try at the beginning through a resolution to solve the conflict, and after this failed, we had the NATO intervention. But later on, in 2000 or 1999, even, I think the UN Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo was founded, where you also worked and later for the Finnish former President Martti Ahtisaari. So my question here concretely is, how can peace building be successful and how can it work? Because today, after 20 years, Kosovo is peaceful compared to other regions in the world, like, I don't know, Nagorno-Karabakh, where ethnic conflict is re-emerging every 10 or 20 years. So yeah, do you think this can actually work? And there have been success stories in the UN history and your own example?
Yeah, good question. Whether there are success stories, I think success is always relative. I mean, if success in many cases is the absence of conflict, then you can describe it as success. But if you then look at the potential best case scenario, I don't think Kosovo is in the it could be further than it is now, but it is not only Kosovo itself or the politicians in Kosovo who are to be blamed for this. It is also the governments who are surrounding Kosovo and also those who are in control of the international constraints of Kosovo. This is, by the way, something. There's a nuance to the Security Council resolutions. I told you that the mandates, they have to be renewed, so you have to issue a new resolution. But in the case of Kosovo, you have resolution 1244, which was adopted in 1999. Like you said, Francesca, and it is still there. It's describing the reality of 1999, the conflict or the immediate post-conflict of Kosovo. And this is like 22 years ago. The things have happened since then. There's no need for kind of all these conflict structures which are stipulated by the 1244. But there's one, maybe two permanent members of the Security Council whose interest is to keep this old resolution alive, because they want to keep the wound open. They want to keep the situation unresolved, and they want to guarantee their own influence. I think this is pure realpolitik. This is how you operate. It is predictable and understandable in a way. Is it morally correct? No, it's not. It's not corresponding to our kind of Western democratic liberal thinking. But this is a reality. And I think in peace building, yeah, I mean there are indicators which can measure the success, but and I don't know if this is the right place to do that. I cannot give you a shining example where peace building has been a success. There have been moderate successes, and there are attempts to get results. And you might be aware that the UN has also, since 2005, they have created a structure to implement peace building. It's a peace building council, which is trying to kind of create a nexus between humanitarian situation and the kind of post-conflict situation. It's and they have several target countries, most of them being in Africa. But that's a different story. But yes, I thank you for the question, which is quite difficult to answer, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you for elaborating on it. I mean, it is always more complicated, and there's no obvious answer to whether something succeeds or not. But yeah, then I'd like to give the floor to Zoe, who has a question on, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, so in line of actually what we've been talking about, there's this norm or this concept called the responsibility to protect within the United Nations. And it was a concept that was introduced in 2005 at the United Nations World Summit. And it's basically about protecting civilians from mass atrocity crimes from their own state. So crimes against humanity, for example, ethnic cleansing and war. But this concept has been quite criticized because it hasn't, well, some say not been very successful. And for example, in the aftermath of the intervention in Libya, this has contributed to an even further division on whether this concept from 2005 is really effective. So I wanted to ask you whether you think this concept that was really preached in the beginning, is this just like another international norm that isn't really implementable in the real political world, or because of the lack of political will? Or what do you think? Is it even a method that can be used in conflict resolution within the United Nations?
Yeah, I try not to get carried away here, but to give you as clear answer as possible. I think it is a valuable concept. It is actually, I'm surprised that we ever managed to get it. How did countries like Russia and China let a reference to R2P into the 2005 document? That's surprising. And it has been used in Libya, and I think in Libya, after Libya, it will be hardly used again, at least not formally as part of a resolution, as a reference. But it is there as a concept, and it has moral weight. It cannot be wished away by those who don't like it. It is there. It is in the discourse. It is in the in the public, also in the intergovernmental discourse, which is weighing quite heavily. So I think it has a lot of use, although it cannot be probably used. That is how I try to summarize it. And yeah, I mean, there's plenty of literature on this subject. It's a science on its own, and if there's more interest into that, you'll definitely find it through open sources. It's actually, there's now going back to New York again. There's a group of friends of countries, a group of friends of R2P. It's co-chaired. Maybe it has changed, but a couple of years ago it was the Netherlands actually was the co-chair, and then either Rwanda or Qatar. And Rwanda would make a lot of sense, of course, because of the genocide. But yes, it's an important part of the UN work. Thanks.
Yeah, so you can, in a way, it's again one of these norms that it's well hard to defend because it's not always so easily implementable, because one thing is the document, but the other thing is political will and the lack thereof. But moving, or another thing that is maybe becoming a piece of paper more than real political action is the Paris Climate Agreement. And we were wondering what your thoughts are on this, because barely any countries have really implemented this so far. And is this a piece of paper that will be thrown out, or is there any action behind it? And do you think it's realistic to believe that it will actually lead to action in the member states?
If I may add, because it's very interesting to us, because it has been cited as a big success both by you and by Ban Ki-moon, despite your criticism of the fact that it looks like we are moving towards like those non-binding type of agreements. To what extent can it be considered a success, maybe as well?
Yeah, I think it would be more useful to look not only at the Paris Agreement, but on the subject of climate more broadly. And I think there might be now, after the Biden administration took over, there might be a renaissance of the climate discussion. It's also manifested in the fact that the US has a high-level climate envoy, John Kerry. And I think climate has been mentioned as one of the few topics where there might be a positive potential for cooperation between the US and Russia, US and China. And there are economic incentives in the climate theme. And not only economic incentives,
yeah, I think he's gone right now, but he should be back in a second if the interruption from earlier was any indication. Very, very, very interesting though. He looks so oh yeah. Oh no. Well, we hope to see him back in a second, guys. Yeah, we will make an attempt to incorporate some of your questions that you've been asking, that we've been getting into our discussion for the next 10 minutes further. Yeah, thanks for sticking around with us. There he is.
Yeah,
Perfect.
Coming back to Russia, I think there's an interest for Russia in climate as well. It's a country of permafrost, as you know, and there are negative consequences and positive consequences in inverted commas for Russia with climate change. But as an Arctic country, its climate is something they cannot omit. So there might be a positive dialogue on climate between Russia and the US and even Russia and the European Union. And this might be against the backdrop of the Paris agreement, or it can be in kind of smaller entities or topics. But one of the few potential areas of cooperation. Thanks.
Perfect. Yes. You just mentioned Russia as being one of those country very interested in making climate politics because they're directly affected by it. Finland, for example, is also a country that is very, very close to the Arctic Circle, and thus may have for which climate might be a high priority. And we were wondering how do international organizations such as the UN and maybe the EU as well, even if you want to touch on that, kind of give Finland or other smaller nations like that a voice basically to voice concerns such as climate change, but like just generally topics that are of high priority to the individual countries.
Yeah, no, good point, and thanks for giving me a chance to advocate a little bit what Finland is doing. we of course on the global level we try to speak through the European Union, but as you know as well, the European Union, especially on climate issues, it's quite a diverse family. Countries with lower ambitions and higher ambitions, and we happen to be on the higher ambition side. So we try to work on our own as well, and there is a recent quite interesting initiative which is a coalition of the ministers of finance on fighting climate change. It's kind of a global initiative. It was launched by Finland and Chile. Chile has now handed over to Indonesia, so we are co-chairing with Indonesia. And the basic idea or the gist of the concept is that governments, through their decisions of finance, those decisions should be taken always remembering what kind of climate effects it has. So whether it's tax or public procurement, expenses of any kind should be regarded through the climate change lens. It's quite an interesting concept, and yesterday we had the information that the US is joining this initiative, which is very, very positive. My idea was that we could also try to sell this or promote this initiative in the EU framework. I think the EU Commission should also be leading on this front, and they could their budget should be a climate friendly budget. But this is one area where we have been active. And then allow me to highlight the Arctic, as you touched upon it. Indeed, we are an Arctic country. We are within the EU categorization. We are regarded as an Arctic country, and this gives us hopefully some benefits, some EU funds for supporting our agriculture. But it also means that we are part of the Arctic Council, which is an 8-country organization with the rotating chairmanship. We chaired it from 2017 to 19. Now then Iceland took over, and now Russia is taking over, actually in the coming months. And it's very interesting to see what kind of policies Russia is going to pursue as the chair of the Arctic Council. Yes, thank you.
Very, very interesting. We are getting towards the end of our talk, and I personally would also really like to ask you a personal question about being a diplomat, because I'm also personally very, very interested in that type of career. I think your former colleague, who you mentioned earlier as well, Samantha Powers, wrote a book about the education of being an idealist. And I was wondering, sometimes throughout the discussion, you said you voiced disbelief how certain things have passed. I wouldn't say that sometimes could have seemed a bit frustrating, but I was wondering, is it possible to be an idealist and a diplomat, or have a career in diplomacy while being an idealist? And if that's those are contradictory things, given all the compromise that is necessary.
I think the answer is absolutely. At least you should enter as an idealist. What happens to you during your career might be a different thing. You might enter the tunnel and then you come in as an idealist and depart the tunnel after 30 years being a very cynical person. I've seen that happening. but it helps to be an idealist. It motivates you. It helps if you come from a country like, well, I guess most of ours, Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, Finland, whose policies are largely based on values, independent of the ruling coalition, the color of the coalition. You have a certain basic set of principles which survive, and your foreign policy is reflected and based on those principles. You feel you can represent. I think that is quite important. I mean, look at the colleague from Myanmar. He could not represent the military regime. There are other examples. I think Libya in the past, and to be frank, I somehow ask myself how colleagues from Hungary or some EU colleagues, they can really, are they, what are they thinking when they have to promote policies which are clearly in violation of the common agenda? And I for the record, I'm speaking as an individual here, not representing my government with this position. But yeah, those thoughts you have constantly, and it's good to remind yourself from time to time why you are in this business, what motivates you. And for me, it is at least partly, and it is idealism. Yes.
Nice. And possibly also maybe the promise of multilateralism in what it can promote.
Yeah, that I learned later. In the beginning, it was like when it's the better version of the Navy. Join the Navy and see the world. And here it's you don't have to join the Navy. You can see the world in the more kind of civilized way. It's a great profession. You can have several careers with one employer if you want, and it gives you also opportunities to, well, educate yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we have one question from the audience concerning the multilateral world. So Ivan is asking, what is the largest threat to the multilateral world in your opinion? Is there anything in particular?
Yeah, I think this is a complex question. It's a very good question, but and there are probably many answers. I start with an anecdote, and I realize we are going a couple of minutes over the time, but I don't mind. I finish my answer. After a Trump administration took over, maybe 6 months after that, we had a meeting of the EU ambassadors in New York. And sometimes we have guest speakers from outside the EU, and we had the Chinese ambassador as a guest. He came, excellent professional, and he started by saying that, well, actually, you, the European Union, and us, China, we are now like-minded defenders of multilateralism and the rules-based international order. And of course, we didn't miss a beat. Everybody kept a straight face, but I guess there were kind of, yeah, many thoughts behind the straight faces. And my concern is, well, I don't know even if it's a concern, but it's a real fact that we are in the struggle now. It's a kind of a systemic competition, and it's a competition between something which is represented by a Chinese society, the Chinese model, and the Western model. The Chinese model is more kind of cohesive, coherent, because it's more controlled, and then the Western model, it's more difficult to put in the box, because it's a blend of the US, Europe, and others. But I think this is the struggle, and it's measured by successes on many fronts. One is how to respond to the pandemic. China has clearly had some successes. Europe not, US yes, UK yes, New Zealand yes. So again, it's a mix. Another battlefield is technology. Again, very, very difficult. And this will be the future. And I think China, they also want to change the normative environment we are acting in, and this is happening in a very strategic way. But maybe that's for another session. Yeah, but this is the big picture, and you should really pay attention to it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. As you say, that could be a whole other discussion as well. Hopefully we'll have time for that another day. But just so this will almost be the end of our discussion today, but I just want to maybe recap a few of the most interesting points that at least we thought were where we learned some new things, and especially this thing you said in the beginning about the UN as a company, where the members are representing different cultures, and it's like a company that are working in different directions. That was an interesting illustration of the United Nations. And also this thing about that a lot of member states are want to change the whole veto procedures, but that is really at a stall because there's not really any prospects of that changing. And then this notion of realpolitik that you mentioned was also quite interesting. This thing about Kosovo, that it's sometimes not even about the situation in Kosovo, but more about how the different members of the Security Council are trying to pave their interests and trying to keep this resolution alive in the interim administration in Kosovo. And then thank you so much. I think this concludes our session. And we would also like to, while you're all still here, present that we have a new event coming up already next week. So if you would like to join that, you should definitely come. And it's on Tuesday, and it's going to be with Alexander Schlick as our guest speaker. He's the special representative for elections of the Belarusian opposition leader. So that's going to be really interesting. So you can find this on Facebook. But nevertheless, thank you so much for coming. Kai, it was really a pleasure to have you. And really interesting discussion with you. We really enjoyed it. So thanks a lot.
Well, thank you. On Chihanovskaya, she was here maybe 4 weeks ago. We had a long, interesting dinner with her. So I'm sure your talk will be interesting. And as you know, my speaker's fee is a T-shirt of the Amsterdam University, and I'm going to wear it with pride as soon as I receive it. So thank you very much.
The speaker's fee has been arranged already, and will be your way shortly.
So I heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. It was truly a pleasure to talk to you and finally to meet you in person. And also thanks everybody for joining our talk. And hope everybody had a good time.
Okay, thanks. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.